In the dying days of the old Republic, when darkness gathered in forgotten corners of the galaxy, a single figure stood before two titans of the Sith. The air itself screamed with unleashed power, stone walls cracked and crumbled, reality bent beneath the weight of ancient fury. She was called the Huntress, then, a lone assassin with horns crowning her skull and eyes that saw what others could not. Eyes that glimpsed fragments of futures not yet written. She had tracked the greatest prey in the galaxy to this forsaken place. But now, watching crimson blades clash in a duel that shook the very foundations of the Force, she understood a terrible truth. She was no longer the hunter. The battle raged before her. Master against apprentice, the ancient Sith Lord Darth Bane, his body ravaged by obelisks and time, fighting for one final victory. His apprentice Darth Zana, weaving darkness itself into weapons of terror. Between them hung a question that would define millennia. Who would survive? Who would carry the Sith forward into shadow? And there, in the chaos of that moment, the Huntress saw something in the fragments of possible futures, a new name, a new destiny. A path that led from this blood-soaked stone floor to legend. Darth Cognus. But how does a cold-blooded assassin become a Dark Lord of the Sith? What choice, what moment of surrender or defiance transforms a hunter into the hunted, a mercenary into a master of the dark side? Now here's something interesting. About 62% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into Star Wars legends, I genuinely appreciate your subscription. It helps me bring you more stories from the darkness. Drop a comment, letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing our global community of lore enthusiasts gathering here. So get comfortable, dim those lights, settle into your blankets, and let's begin this journey together into one of the most fascinating and mysterious Sith Lords in galactic history. Our story begins approximately 980 years before the Battle of Yavin, in the final days of Darth Bane's long and terrible reign. The galaxy knew nothing of the Sith. The Jedi believed their ancient enemies destroyed, reduced to memory and legend, but in the shadows the rule of two endured. One master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. Across the Outer Rim territories, in the criminal underworld that thrived beyond Republic jurisdiction, whispers spoke of an unstoppable tracker. The Huntress, they called her, an Iktochi assassin, whose reputation preceded her like a dark omen. No target escaped her, no contract went unfulfilled. She was not human. Horns curved back from her skull, marking her as one of the Iktochi species from the harsh moon of Iktochi. Her skin held the characteristic pinkish hue of her people, but it was her eyes that unsettled those who met her gaze. Eyes that seemed to look not at you, but through you, past you, into possibilities and futures you could not perceive. The Iktochi possessed a natural gift, a species-wide ability to glimpse moments ahead, to sense coming storms and approaching danger. Limited precognition, the Jedi might have called it, useful for survival on their harsh homeworld where the wind itself could kill. But the Huntress was different. Her gift extended far beyond her species' normal abilities. She could track a target across star systems by following threads of probability. She knew which cantina her prey would visit before they knew themselves. She sensed ambushes before they were sprung, saw escape routes before they were taken. This made her valuable. This made her expensive. This made her the perfect weapon for those who could afford her services. She worked alone, preferring the clarity of solitude to the complications of partnership. Her ship was functional, not comfortable. Her weapons were precise, not ornamental. Everything about her existence was honed to a single purpose: find the target, complete the contract, collect payment, move on. She felt no particular pleasure in the killing, no sadistic joy in the hunt. It was simply what she did. and she did it with the cold efficiency of a force of nature. A storm does not question why it destroys. It simply is. But even the most efficient predator can be drawn into a larger game. Even the most careful hunter can become prey to forces beyond her understanding. And in the galaxy's forgotten corners, ancient powers stirred. The last of Bane's line prepared for succession. The rule of two demanded its price, and the huntress, unknowing, was about to step into a confrontation that would shatter her world and forge her into something far greater and far more terrible than a mere assassin. Her transformation had already begun, though she did not yet know it. Ixtoch was not a world that bred weakness. The moon orbited the gas giant Ixtochen in the expansion region, a place where survival demanded constant vigilance. The winds there could strip flesh from bone. Storms arrived without warning, turning day into howling darkness. The Ixtochi people learned to sense danger before it struck, or they did not survive long enough to pass on their genes. She was born into this harsh reality. One child among many in a settlement where life was measured in seasons, survived rather than years lived. Her earliest memories were of wind pressing against stone walls, of her mother checking the sky with eyes that could read weather patterns in the movement of clouds, of learning to feel the pressure changes that signaled coming catastrophe. But even among a species gifted with foresight, she was different. While other children sensed storms hours before they arrived, she felt them days in advance. While others glimpsed moments ahead in combat or conversation, she saw branching pathways of possibility stretching into futures that had not yet solidified into certainty. Her gift was not a blessing. It isolated her. How do you explain to others that you can see the consequences of choices not yet made? How do you form friendships when you already know which relationships will sour, which promises will be broken, which companions will betray or abandon you? She learned to keep her visions private, learned to move through life with careful steps, always aware of the invisible threads connecting present actions to future outcomes. But awareness without power is its own kind of torture. Knowing what will come and being unable to change it felt like drowning in slow motion. So she left, not fleeing, but seeking. If her gift made her different, then perhaps difference could become strength. If she could not find peace among her own people, perhaps she could find purpose elsewhere. The galaxy beyond Ixtoch was vast and violent and utterly indifferent to one more displaced soul seeking meaning in the chaos. She drifted through the outer rim, taking work where she could find it: security jobs, bodyguard contracts, recovery operations for cargo that had gone missing in ways that made legitimate authorities uncomfortable. Her precognitive edge gave her advantages that others lacked. She knew when to press forward and when to retreat. She sensed ambushes before they were sprung. In negotiations, she read the intentions behind false smiles and empty promises. Gradually, her reputation grew. The jobs became more dangerous. The pay increased proportionally. She discovered something crucial during those early years. Violence did not disturb her the way it disturbed others. When a situation demanded blood, she could provide it without hesitation or regret, not because she enjoyed killing, but because she understood it as simply another tool, another solution to certain problems. Some locks required delicate picking, others required explosives. Some targets could be negotiated with or frightened into compliance, others needed to die. This pragmatic approach to mortality made her exceptionally good at a very specific type of work: assassination. The jobs other hunters hesitated to accept, she took without question. The targets others considered too dangerous or too well protected, she eliminated with clinical efficiency. Her methods became legendary in certain circles. She did not rely on brute force or overwhelming firepower. Instead, she studied her targets through the lens of her precognitive gift. She watched the branching possibilities of their lives, identified the moments of vulnerability, the instance where protection would fail or attention would waver. Then she struck with surgical precision. One contract involved a Hutt crime lord who had betrayed his partners and surrounded himself with dozens of bodyguards. She spent 3 weeks observing him, not physically present but reaching out through the force she was only beginning to understand, watching the patterns of his life. She saw the moment he would be alone, a window of 17 seconds when his usual paranoia would lapse. She was there when that moment arrived. The job took less time than it took him to realize he was dying. Another target was a Republic senator who had made too many enemies and too few friends. His security was supposedly impenetrable. She studied the schedules, the rotations, the personalities of every guard. She saw the one who could be bribed, the one whose attention would falter at a crucial instant, the route that would remain unwatched for precisely the time she needed. She walked into his secure compound, completed her contract, and walked out past guards who never realized she had been there until bodies were discovered hours later. The criminal underworld began calling her the Huntress. The name spread through cantinas and smuggler ports, spoken with a mixture of respect and fear. If the Huntress was hired to find you, you would be found. If she was hired to kill you, you were already dead. The only variable was how long it would take for your body to catch up with your fate. This was the life she had built for herself, solitary, efficient, profitable. It lacked meaning beyond the immediate satisfaction of challenges, overcome and credits earned. But meaning seemed like a luxury for those who had the comfort of ignorance. She knew too much about how futures unfolded to believe in grand purposes or noble destinies. Then Darth entered her life, and everything changed. She met him on Seutrik 4, a world she was passing through between contracts. He approached her in a cantina where she sat alone, as always, in a corner that allowed observation of all entrances. He was human, young, with the kind of confidence that came from either great power or great stupidity. She could not immediately tell which. He sat without invitation, and spoke as if they were old acquaintances. He had heard of her reputation, he said, her unique talents, her success rate. He had a job that required someone of her particular skills, not a simple elimination, something more complex, a hunt that would challenge even her abilities. She listened because she was curious, and because her precognitive sense detected something unusual about him. There was power in him, coiled and barely controlled, not the mundane power of wealth or political influence. Something deeper, something she had felt before in glimpses but never confronted directly. He was force-sensitive, untrained or poorly trained. His connection to the force leaked out around him like heat from a poorly sealed furnace. And there was darkness in that power, a taint, a hunger. The job he described was unlike anything she had done before. He wanted her to track 2 individuals who were among the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, people who had mastered arts that most believed extinct, warriors who had overthrown empires and shattered armies, sorcerers who bent reality itself to their will. He was hunting Sith Lords. The word meant nothing to her. Then she knew the legends as most did. The ancient enemy of the Jedi, defeated and destroyed a millennium ago. Ghost stories to frighten children, warnings about the corruption of power. But Darth spoke of them as if they were real, as if they walked the galaxy still, hidden in plain sight, manipulating events from the shadows. He claimed to have been an apprentice to one such Sith, claimed to have fled rather than face the inevitable confrontation when his training was complete. He spoke of the rule of 2, a doctrine that limited the Sith to only a master and an apprentice. He described powers that seemed impossible, techniques that defied natural law. And he offered her more credits than she had earned in her entire career to help him find these legends made flesh. She should have refused. Every instinct honed through years of survival told her this was dangerous beyond measure, but her precognitive gift showed her something else. Fragments of a future where she accepted this contract, where she followed this strange, frightened man on his obsessive quest. The details were unclear, shrouded in darkness and uncertainty, but the pull was undeniable. She agreed. Not for the money, though it was substantial, not for the challenge, though it promised to be unlike any she had faced. She agreed, because her gift was showing her something it had never shown before. A future where she was more than a hunter, more than an assassin moving through the galaxy like a ghost, touching nothing, changed by nothing, leaving only corpses in her wake. A future where she mattered. She did not yet understand what that meant, but she would learn. The hunt for the Sith had begun. Set Darth was a complicated man, and the huntress learned quickly that his complications ran deeper than simple cowardice or greed. He had touched real power once and had been forever marked by the experience. Like someone who had stared directly into a sun, he could no longer see the world in normal light. He told her the story in pieces during long hours aboard ship as they traveled from world to world following threads of rumor and whisper. He had been a Jedi once, he claimed, not a particularly talented one, but competent enough to survive his training and take on missions for the Order. Then he had encountered a Sith artifact. The details of how or where remained vague in his telling, carefully edited. But the artifact had awakened something in him, a hunger, a recognition that the Jedi path was incomplete, that they denied themselves power in the name of principle. He had sought out the Sith, actually found them, which the huntress understood was either extraordinary luck or extraordinary skill. Darth Zana had taken him as an apprentice, or at least a student. He had learned from her, studied under her tutelage, glimpsed the techniques and philosophies that the Jedi insisted were destroyed. But when the time came for him to challenge her, as the rule of two demanded, he had fled. He spoke of it matter-of-factly, without shame. Zana would have killed him, he explained. He was not strong enough, not skilled enough, not ruthless enough to defeat a true Sith Lord. So he had run and hidden himself in the vastness of the galaxy. Yet he could not stop thinking about them. The Sith, their power, their knowledge. He spoke of them, the way addicts spoke of their vice, with a mixture of longing and self-loathing. He wanted what they had, but feared the price of taking it. His obsession had led him to track rumors of Darth Bane, the founder of the Rule of Two, the architect of the Sith's survival through a millennium of hiding. Bane was ancient now, his body failing, sustained only through dark side techniques and parasitic creatures called obelisks that fed on force energy while granting their host incredible resilience. Set Darth believed that Bane was searching for a way to escape death itself, that the Dark Lord was pursuing immortality through a technique called essence transfer, the ability to abandon a dying body and possess a new one. If Bane succeeded, Set Darth reasoned, he would target his own apprentice. Darth Zana would be the ideal vessel, young, powerful, already steeped in the dark side. The ultimate act of the Rule of Two would be the master devouring the apprentice not through combat, but through possession. This was where the huntress proved invaluable. Set Darth knew the Sith were real, knew roughly where they operated, but could not pin down their exact locations. They moved through the galaxy like phantoms, leaving barely any trace. But the huntress could sense them. Her precognitive gift responded to their presence in the Force like a compass needle drawn to magnetic north. The hunt took them across dozens of worlds. She would reach out with her mind, searching for the distinctive ripples that powerful Force users left in the fabric of possibility. Most beings move through time in predictable patterns. Their futures branched in understandable ways based on comprehensible choices. But truly powerful Force users bent probability around themselves. Their possible futures spiraled outward in complex fractals that hurt to perceive directly. She learned to recognize the specific signatures. Bane's presence felt like ancient stone, immovable and patient and heavy with accumulated power. Xana's was more fluid, like darkness that could flow into any shape, adaptive and hungry. They were never in the same place for long, always moving, always cautious. The trail led them to Duan eventually, a world in the outer rim that appeared on few star charts, a place so insignificant that most spacers had never heard of it. But the Huntress's visions converged there with increasing clarity. Something was drawing the Sith to this forgotten world, something important enough to risk exposure. Set Hearth's research revealed the reason. Dudan was home to the Stone Prison, an ancient structure built by the Sith centuries ago. It had been designed to hold captured Jedi, to torture them, to break them, and turn them into servants of the dark side. The prison was a nexus of dark side energy, saturated with centuries of suffering and hatred. It was exactly the kind of place where a Sith Lord might attempt something as dangerous as essence transfer. The ambient dark side power would fuel the technique. The isolation would prevent interference. And if something went wrong, if the technique failed catastrophically, Doan was remote enough that the resulting destruction would go unnoticed by the wider galaxy. As they approached the world, the Huntress felt her visions becoming more intense. She saw fragments of the near future with unprecedented clarity. She saw herself walking through corridors of stone. She saw crimson light reflecting off wet walls. She saw figures locked in combat, their power tearing at the fabric of reality itself. And she saw herself making a choice. The details were unclear, shrouded in the uncertainty that always surrounded moments of genuine free will. But the weight of that future choice pressed on her like a physical thing. Whatever happened on Dorian would change her, would transform her into something other than what she was. Set Hearth grew increasingly nervous as they entered the Doan system. His usual confidence evaporated, replaced by jittery energy and compulsive checking of their ship's systems. He spoke less. When he did speak, it was to second-guess their approach, to suggest alternate plans, to hint that perhaps they should observe from orbit rather than risk direct contact. The Huntress recognized his fear for what it was. He had come all this way, spent years tracking the Sith, but now that confrontation was imminent. His courage failed him. He wanted the power they possessed, but would not pay the price required to claim it. This was why he had fled Xana's service. This was why he would always be less than he imagined himself to be. She felt no contempt for his weakness, only a distant kind of recognition. She had spent her entire life observing the gap between what people wanted and what they were willing to sacrifice to obtain it. Set Hearth wanted greatness, but would settle for survival. Most beings were the same. They dreamed of transformation, but when faced with the actual cost, they retreated into comfortable mediocrity. But the Huntress was beginning to understand something about herself. She was not most beings. Her precognitive gift had always set her apart, had forced her to see the world differently than others. Now it was showing her a path that most would flee from, a path that led through darkness and pain and terrible choices into something vast and powerful and completely unlike anything she had been before. She could refuse, could turn the ship around, collect her payment from Set Hearth for bringing him this far, return to her life as an assassin drifting through the outer rim. That future was available to her, safe, predictable, empty. Or she could descend to Doan, could walk into the stone prison, could witness whatever was about to unfold between the Sith Lords and accept the consequences of that witnessing. The choice was hers. Fate offered opportunities, but did not compel. Even her gift, as powerful as it was, could not tell her what she would choose. The moment was too pivotal, too balanced between equally possible outcomes. As their ship broke through Doan's atmosphere and the stone prison came into view, a massive structure of dark stone rising from barren landscape, the huntress made her decision. She would see this through, to whatever end awaited. She would step into the darkness and let it transform her or destroy her, because a life spent avoiding risk, spent choosing safety over significance, was not a life worth the name. The landing gear extended. The ship settled onto ancient stone. Set Hearth sat frozen in the co-pilot seat, his face pale. The huntress stood, checked her weapons, and walked toward the exit ramp. Behind her, she heard Set Hearth whisper something, a prayer or a curse. She did not turn back to ask which. The air on Dawn tasted wrong. Not polluted exactly, but corrupted, like fruit left too long in the sun. Sweet decay underlying every breath. The huntress felt it the moment she stepped off the ship, a physical sensation that had nothing to do with atmospheric composition and everything to do with the dark side energies that saturated this world. The stone prison rose before them, a massive edifice of black rock that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The architecture was brutal in its simplicity. No ornamentation, no aesthetics beyond the pure expression of dominance and suffering. Walls thick enough to muffle any scream. Corridors designed to disorient and trap. Cells built to break minds as efficiently as bodies. The huntress extended her awareness cautiously, sending out tendrils of precognitive sense to map the immediate future. What she found made her breath catch. The stone prison was occupied. Multiple presences burned within those dark walls, each one a sun of force energy that made her own abilities feel like candlelight by comparison. She recognized the signatures from her visions. Darth Bane and Darth Xana were both here, just as Set Hearth had predicted. But there were others as well. Force users she had not anticipated. The prison was becoming crowded with people who should not be in the same place at the same time. Set Hearth remained near the ship. His earlier nervousness crystallized into outright terror. He made excuses about maintaining their exit route, about monitoring communications, about being ready to extract them if things went wrong. The huntress did not argue. His presence would be a liability inside. If he wanted to hide behind manufactured reasons for cowardice, that was his choice. She approached the prison alone. The main entrance hung open, a mouth of darkness inviting her forward. Her weapons felt inadequate suddenly. What good was a blaster against beings who could tear apart reality with thought? What use were blades against those who wielded the Force itself as a weapon? But she had not come this far to turn back at the threshold. She stepped into shadow. The interior was exactly as oppressive as the exterior promised. Corridors stretched in multiple directions, each one identical to the last. The dark side presence was stronger here, thick enough to feel against her skin like oil. She could taste old anguish in the air. Centuries of Jedi brought here to be broken, their light slowly extinguished until only darkness remained. Her precognitive gift guided her deeper into the complex. She saw the paths she needed to take moments before she took them, each turn anticipated, each doorway known before she reached it. The prison was enormous, but she navigated it as if following a map drawn in her mind. Then she heard voices. The sound carried strangely through stone passages, distorted and multiplied by echoes. She moved toward them carefully, every hunter's instinct screaming awareness of how exposed she was, how vulnerable. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. She pressed herself against the wall just before the opening, hidden in shadow, and extended her senses to perceive what lay beyond. What she felt froze her in place. Two presences dominated the space. One was ancient and terrible, power accumulated over decades until it became something almost geological in its weight and density. The other was younger, but no less formidable, darkness refined and sharpened into an instrument of devastating precision. Darth Bane and Darth Zana, master and apprentice, standing in the same room for what her gift told her would be one of the last times. But they were not fighting. Not yet. They were talking, their voices low and controlled, discussing something with the careful courtesy of predators circling each other. The huntress understood what she was witnessing, the calm before inevitable violence, the last negotiations before war. She risked a glance around the corner. Bane was impossible to miss. His body was covered in parasitic creatures, obelisks that clung to his flesh like living armor. They pulsed with dark side energy, feeding on his power while granting him enhanced strength and near invulnerability. But the huntress could see what the armor could not hide. He was dying. His body was failing beneath the parasites. Time, that most patient enemy, was finally claiming victory over even this ancient lord of darkness. Zana stood opposite him, her posture relaxed, but her presence anything but calm. She was human, appearing to be in her 30s, blonde hair framing a face that could have been beautiful if not for the hardness in her eyes. The huntress recognized something in those eyes, the look of someone who had survived by being more ruthless than their opponents, more willing to do what was necessary without hesitation or mercy. There was a third person in the chamber, a woman the huntress did not recognize. Human, wearing robes that suggested Jedi origins, but something in her bearing spoke of pain and obsession. Her presence in the Force was ragged, torn, as if she had been wounded in ways that healing could not reach. The huntress learned later that this was Sarah, a former Jedi who had come to Doan seeking revenge against Bane for her father's death. She had brought her own companion, a healer named Caleb, who possessed Force abilities but lacked combat training. They were caught in forces far beyond their ability to control, players in a game whose rules they did not understand. And somewhere in the prison, Darth was likely cowering in whatever hiding place he had found. 5 Force users under one roof, 5 different agendas colliding. The huntress's precognitive gift showed her fragments of how this could end. In every vision, the outcome was violence. In most, not everyone survived. She watched as tensions in the chamber escalated. Sarah confronted Bane directly, her lightsaber ignited, blue blade humming with barely contained fury. The Dark Lord did not even bother to draw his own weapon. He simply stood there, patient as stone, waiting for the girl to realize how outmatched she was. The huntress felt the moment when Bane decided to kill Sarah. It was not anger or fear, simply the elimination of an annoyance. He reached out through the Force, and the huntress saw invisible power wrap around Sarah's throat. The young woman clawed at nothing, her lightsaber falling from nerveless fingers as she struggled to breathe. Zana intervened, not to save Sarah from compassion, but because she recognized what her master was doing. He was testing her, seeing if she would allow him to kill potential witnesses, or if she would protect her own interests by keeping them alive. It was one more move in their ongoing game, one more test of strength and will. The power that flared when Zana and Bane's wills collided made the huntress's vision white out for an instant. The Force itself seemed to scream. Reality bent under the pressure of their confrontation. This was not the power of ordinary Force users. This was something older, deeper, more terrible than anything the huntress had imagined possible. She understood several things in that moment of revelation. First, that everything Darth had told her was true. The Sith existed. They had survived in hiding for a millennium. They possessed power that made legends seem like understatements. Second, that she had been catastrophically naive to think herself capable of hunting such beings. They operated on a level so far beyond her own abilities that comparison was meaningless. She was an insect watching titans clash. Third, and most important, that she wanted what they had, not for the sake of power itself, but for what power represented: significance. The ability to shape reality rather than merely react to it. The capacity to matter in ways that echoed across time. The confrontation in the chamber subsided as quickly as it had flared. Bane released Sarah, who collapsed, gasping. Xana lowered her guard fractionally. They circled back to their careful verbal sparring, but the Huntress could feel the change. The pretense of civility was crumbling. Soon, very soon, they would stop talking and start trying to kill each other. She should leave. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to retreat before she was noticed, before she became collateral damage in a conflict between beings who could kill her with a thought. Set Hearth would be relieved. They could report what they had learned, collect whatever rewards that knowledge might earn, disappear back into the comfortable obscurity of the Outer Rim. But her precognitive gift showed her something else. A path forward that led through the coming violence. She did not understand where it led or what it would cost, but she felt its pull stronger than any she had experienced before. So she stayed, hidden in shadow, barely breathing, every sense focused on the chamber where ancient darkness prepared for succession. She stayed because some part of her recognized that this moment, this place, was where her old life would end. What would emerge from the ashes of that ending, she could not yet see, but she stayed anyway, accepting whatever fate the darkness had prepared for her. The stone prison had witnessed centuries of suffering, but nothing in its long and terrible history compared to the power about to be unleashed within its walls. The Huntress felt it building, a pressure in the force like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but she remained frozen in shadow, watching. Darth Bane and Darth Xana stood facing each other in a large chamber, the space between them charged with 1,000 years of Sith tradition. The rule of two demanded this moment. Master against apprentice. Only one would walk away. Only one deserved to carry the Sith legacy forward. Ban moved first. For a being whose body was failing, whose flesh was ravaged by parasitic orbalisks and the corruption of the dark side, he moved with shocking speed. His crimson blade ignited, the sound filling the chamber like a scream. Xana's twin blades answered, purple energy humming as she fell into a defensive stance. The Huntress had seen combat before, had killed in ways both efficient and brutal. But this was something entirely different. This was war condensed into two beings, centuries of accumulated power focused into lethal intent. Their lightsabers clashed with explosive force. The sound was deafening, reality itself seeming to crack under the impact. Bane pressed forward with relentless aggression, his form vive technique overwhelming in its power. Each strike could have shattered stone. Each movement carried the weight of absolute commitment. But Xana was not her master's equal in raw strength. She had learned different lessons, studied different arts. Where Bane embodied physical dominance, Xana had mastered the subtle and the mental. Her Jarkai dual blade technique kept her master at bay, her movements precise and economical. The real battle was not being fought with lightsabers. The Huntress could feel it, currents of invisible power swirling through the chamber. Bane was attempting something she could barely comprehend. Essence transfer, the ancient Sith technique of abandoning a dying body and possessing a new one. He was trying to steal Xana's flesh, to claim her youth and power for himself. The air grew thick with dark side energy. The Huntress felt it pressing against her mind, seeking entry, trying to crack open her consciousness. She reinforced her mental shields desperately, suddenly understanding why Set Hearth had fled. This was beyond mortal comprehension. This was power that should not exist. Xana responded with her own mastery of Sith sorcery. She wove illusions and nightmares, projecting them directly into Bane's mind. The Huntress caught fragments of what Xana was creating. Visions of failure, memories of defeat, the faces of everyone Bane had failed to save or had been forced to destroy. Every doubt, every fear, every moment of weakness magnified and weaponized. The physical duel intensified. Blood spattered on stone. Both combatants bore wounds now, though neither seemed to notice or care. Pain was irrelevant. Exhaustion was impossible. They fought with the totality of their beings, holding nothing back, knowing that hesitation meant death. Elsewhere in the prison, Sarah and her companion Caleb fought for their own survival. The former Jedi had come seeking revenge, but found herself caught in forces far beyond her ability to control. Set Half was hiding somewhere in the depths, his cowardice complete, but the Huntress remained, watching, learning, absorbing every detail of the confrontation. She saw how Bane's orbalisks, those parasitic creatures that had granted him such power, were now his weakness. They fed on his dark side energy. Yes, but they also limited him. They had fused with his flesh so completely that removal was impossible. They were slowly killing him, even as they kept him alive. She saw how Xana's technique was built on patience. The apprentice did not try to overpower her master directly. Instead, she wore him down, exploited every weakness, turned his strength against him. This was the wisdom of the rule of two made manifest. The apprentice must be cunning enough to eventually surpass the master. The battle reached its crescendo. Bane's essence transfer was nearly complete, his consciousness reaching out to invade Xana's mind. The Huntress felt the moment when he almost succeeded, when victory seemed certain for the ancient Dark Lord. Xana's body began to spasm, her movements becoming uncoordinated as Bane's will attempted to override her own. But Xana had one final defense. She unleashed the full power of her Sith sorcery, not against Bane's body, but against his invading consciousness. She showed him visions of his own death, of his legacy crumbling, of everything he had built collapsing into dust. She attacked not his strength but his fear, the one weakness that even Darth Bane could not completely eliminate. The Huntress felt Bane's presence in the Force waver, felt his grip on Xana's consciousness slip, felt the ancient Dark Lord's power fracturing under the assault of his own apprentice's mastery. Then it was over. Bane's body collapsed, the orbalisk still clinging to his flesh even in death. His essence, that immortal consciousness he had tried so desperately to preserve, dissipated into the Force. Or did it? The Huntress could not be certain. There was something strange about the way the battle had ended, an ambiguity that would haunt her later. Xana stood alone, breathing heavily, blood dripping from multiple wounds. But she was alive. She was victorious. She was now the sole Dark Lord of the Sith, the living embodiment of Bane's rule of two. The chamber fell silent, except for Xana's labored breathing. The oppressive weight of dark side energy began to dissipate slowly, like storm clouds breaking after a hurricane. The Huntress remained motionless in her hiding place, knowing that the most dangerous moment was yet to come. Xana turned her head slightly, not looking directly at the Huntress's position, but close enough to make it clear she had known all along that someone was watching. When she spoke, her voice carried across the chamber with perfect clarity despite her exhaustion. "Come out. I know you are there." The Huntress had faced death before, had walked into situations where survival seemed impossible and emerged alive through skill and precognition. But this was different. This was a being who had just defeated Darth Bane, who embodied power beyond anything the galaxy knew existed. She could run, could try to escape in the chaos, hope that Xana was too wounded and exhausted to pursue. Her precognitive gift showed her that possibility. It also showed her dying in 100 different ways as Xana hunted her through the stone prison's corridors. Or she could step forward, could accept whatever fate the new Dark Lord had planned for her, could trust the vision that had brought her here, the pull toward significance that had drawn her to Doan despite every rational argument against it. The Huntress stepped out of shadow into the chamber. She kept her hands away from her weapons, making no threatening gestures. She met Xana's eyes directly, showing neither fear nor defiance, simply acceptance of whatever would come. Xana studied her in silence. The Dark Lord's gaze seemed to pierce through flesh and bone, examining not just the physical form, but the essence beneath. The huntress felt her mind being probed, gentle but irresistible, her thoughts and memories laid bare. "You have a gift," Xana said finally. Her voice was calm, measured, showing no trace of the exertion from the battle. "You see things others cannot. Futures, possibilities, the web of cause and effect stretching forward through time." The huntress nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. "You came here knowing what you would witness," Xana continued. "You saw this confrontation in your visions and chose to attend anyway. That requires either courage or stupidity." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I think it is courage and something more. Hunger. You want what I have, not for the sake of power itself, but for what it represents." The huntress felt her throat tighten. How could Xana know so much from such a brief examination? How could she see so clearly into motivations that the huntress herself had barely acknowledged? "Your employer betrayed you," Xana said, and the huntress understood she was referring to Set Hearth. "He fled, as I knew he would. He lacks the strength to embrace what we are. But you remained. You chose to witness this succession, even knowing you might die for it." The Dark Lord took a step closer. The huntress forced herself to remain still, to not flinch or retreat. Xana's presence in the Force was overwhelming, like standing at the base of a mountain and trying to comprehend its full scope. "I have need of an apprentice," Xana said softly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. The rule of two demands it. Master and apprentice, locked in eternal struggle, each generation stronger than the last. My master is dead. His knowledge lives on through me. But I cannot be the last. The Sith must continue. The huntress felt something shift in her chest. This was the moment her visions had been showing her. This was why she had come to Doan, why she had tracked the Sith across the galaxy, why she had risked everything to witness this succession, not to observe, to participate. "Your precognitive abilities are raw, untrained," Xana continued, "but they are strong, stronger than any natural Iktochi gift should be. You are Force-sensitive, whether you fully understand what that means or not. I can teach you to refine your power, to see not just fragments of possible futures, but to understand the currents that shape destiny itself. I can show you arts that have been hidden from the galaxy for a millennium." She paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. "But know this, the path I offer is not one of comfort or safety. As my apprentice, you will face challenges that will break lesser beings. You will learn secrets that will change how you see reality itself. And eventually, if you survive your training, if you grow strong enough, you will face me as I faced my master. One of us will die. That is the way of the Sith." The huntress understood that this was a test. Xana was measuring her reaction, gauging whether she possessed the strength of will to accept such a fate. A lesser being would flee, would refuse the offer, preferring the certainty of survival over the risk of greatness. But the huntress had not come this far to turn back at the threshold. She had seen enough of what power could accomplish, had witnessed the gulf between what she was and what she could become, and she had accepted, somewhere deep in her core, that significance was worth any price. "I accept," she said. Her voice was steady, showing none of the tumult of emotion swirling beneath the surface. Xana smiled. It was not a warm expression. It held satisfaction. Yes, but also calculation. The smile of a master who had found a suitable tool, one that might eventually become sharp enough to cut back. "Then kneel," the Dark Lord commanded. The huntress knelt on the blood-stained stone, bowing her head before the being who would become her master. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The dark side energy that had dissipated during the battle began to gather again, swirling around the two figures like a living thing. "From this moment forward, you are no longer a huntress," Xana said, her voice taking on a ritual cadence. "You are no longer merely Iktachi. You are Sith, and as Sith, you shall bear a name that reflects your power and your purpose." The dark side energy intensified, pressing down on the kneeling figure with almost physical weight. The huntress felt it seeping into her, changing her, marking her as something other than what she had been. "You see what others cannot," Xana continued. "You perceive the hidden patterns, the invisible threads connecting present to future. Your gift is knowledge, understanding, the ability to know what is obscured from lesser minds." She placed her hand on the huntress's bowed head, and power flowed through that touch like lightning through a conduit. "Rise, Darth Cognus. Rise and embrace your destiny as the newest inheritor of the Sith legacy." The newly christened Darth Cognus stood, and she felt the weight of that name settling into her very being. She was no longer the huntress. That identity had died here in this chamber, burned away by the fires of transformation. What rose in its place was something greater and more terrible. A Sith Lord, an apprentice to the Dark Lord of the Sith, a link in the chain of succession that stretched back 1,000 years to Darth Bane himself. Around them, the stone prison seemed to acknowledge what had occurred. The walls themselves felt different, as if recognizing a new power walking their ancient corridors. Somewhere in the depths, Set Hearth cowered still, too frightened to emerge. Sarah and Caleb had fled or died. It no longer mattered. All that mattered was this moment, this transformation, this birth of a new Sith Lord who would carry the darkness forward into an uncertain future. Xana looked at her newest apprentice with eyes that held both approval and warning. "Come," she said. "We have much to discuss, and this place has served its purpose. The galaxy awaits, unknowing and unprepared for what we will build in shadow." Cognus followed her master from the chamber, stepping over Bane's corpse without a second glance. The past was dead. The future stretched ahead, dark and full of terrible promise. The rule of two continued, master and apprentice, darkness preserved through succession, and a new name was added to the secret lineage of Sith Lords who would one day bring the galaxy to its knees. The journey away from Doan marked the end of one existence and the beginning of another. Cognus sat in the co-pilot seat of Xana's ship, watching the stars stream past in hyperspace, and felt the weight of her transformation settling into her bones. She was no longer the huntress. That name, that identity, felt like a discarded skin now, something she had worn for years, but that no longer fit the shape of what she had become. The being who had tracked targets across the outer rim for credits and contracts seemed impossibly distant, as if she were remembering someone else's life. Xana piloted in silence, her wounds from the battle with Bane already beginning to heal through dark side techniques. The Dark Lord had not spoken since they left the stone prison, but Cognus could feel her master's attention, a constant presence in the force like gravity pulling at her consciousness. Finally, as they approached their destination, a safe house Xana maintained on a forgotten moon in the mid-rim, the Dark Lord spoke. "Do you understand what you have accepted?" Cognus considered the question carefully. She knew that Xana was not asking for platitudes or easy answers. The Sith did not value false confidence or hollow bravado. They valued truth, even when that truth was uncomfortable. "I understand that I have bound myself to a path that will consume my entire existence," Cognus replied. "I understand that the power you offer comes with a price measured in suffering and sacrifice. I understand that the rule of two demands eventual confrontation between master and apprentice, and that only one of us will survive that confrontation." She paused, choosing her next words with care. "What I do not yet understand is the full scope of what being Sith truly means." I have witnessed your power. I have seen what you and Bane were capable of. But witnessing is not the same as comprehending. I suspect that true understanding will only come through the training you offer." Xana nodded, something like approval flickering across her features. "Good. Many who take this path believe they understand before they have even begun. They think power is simply a tool to be wielded, a weapon to be mastered. They do not grasp that becoming Sith requires fundamental transformation of what you are." The ship emerged from hyperspace, the forgotten moon appearing before them. Its surface was barren, cratered, unremarkable in every way, exactly the kind of place where Sith could work in absolute secrecy. As they landed, Xana continued her explanation. "The Jedi speak of the Force as if it were a benevolent energy field that flows through all living things, connecting them in harmony. They are not entirely wrong, but their understanding is incomplete, deliberately so. They have blinded themselves to half of what the Force truly is." They walked down the landing ramp into cold, thin air. The facility Xana maintained here was underground, hidden beneath layers of rock and shielding that made it invisible to any sensor scan. As they descended into its depths, Xana's voice echoed off stone walls. "The dark side is not corruption. As the Jedi claim, it is not a perversion of the Force's true nature. It is simply the aspect of the Force that they fear to embrace. Passion, emotion, the raw power of will, unshackled from their pathetic principles and restrictions." The facility opened before them. It was Spartan, but functional. Training chambers, meditation cells, libraries filled with ancient texts, everything necessary to forge an apprentice into a true Sith Lord. "The Jedi preach peace and serenity," Xana said, leading Cognus deeper into the complex. "They teach their students to suppress emotion, to deny the very passions that make them alive. They believe this makes them strong. In truth, it makes them weak. They cripple themselves, limit their own potential in the name of their precious balance." She stopped in a large chamber, empty except for ancient Sith markings carved into the floor. This would serve as Cognus's primary training space. "We embrace what they deny," Xana continued. "We draw power from our emotions, our anger, our hatred, our desire for dominance. These are not weaknesses to be overcome. They are sources of strength to be refined and directed. Through passion, we gain strength. Through strength, we gain power. Through power, we gain victory. Through victory, our chains are broken." Cognus recognized the words, the Sith Code. Set Hearth had spoken of it during their hunt, but hearing it from Xana's lips gave it new weight, new meaning. "The Force shall free you," Xana finished. "That is the final line. The promise of what we seek. Freedom from the limitations that bind lesser beings. Freedom from death itself. If we grow strong enough. Freedom to reshape reality, according to our will." She turned to face Cognus directly. "Your training begins now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Now. The Sith do not ease their apprentices into power. We throw them into the fire and see if they emerge tempered or broken." Cognus felt a flicker of apprehension, but crushed it immediately. Fear was acceptable. The Sith did not deny fear, but they transformed it into fuel. She would not allow herself to be broken. "Your precognitive abilities are your greatest asset," Xana said, "but they are also a trap. You have relied on them your entire life, used them as a crutch to navigate danger. As my apprentice, you will learn to see beyond mere futures. You will learn to perceive the deeper patterns, the currents of causality, the invisible forces that shape galactic events." She gestured, and Force energy crackled in the air between them. "But first, you must learn the fundamentals: control, focus, the ability to channel dark side power without being consumed by it. Many apprentices have died in the early stages of training because they lacked the discipline to contain the forces they unleashed. Over the following days, which stretched into weeks, Cognus learned what it truly meant to embrace the dark side. Xana was a demanding master, accepting no excuses, tolerating no weakness. She pushed Cognus beyond every limit, physical and mental, forcing her to draw on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. The training was brutal. Meditation sessions that lasted for days, Cognus forced to maintain perfect focus while Xana assaulted her mind with illusions and attacks. Physical conditioning that left her body screaming for rest, teaching her to ignore pain through sheer force of will. Studies of ancient Sith texts written in languages she had to decode, absorbing knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. But most challenging were the Force exercises. Xana taught her to channel emotion into power, to take anger and hatred and transform them into tangible effects. Moving objects without touching them, sensing the thoughts and feelings of others, projecting fear and confusion into enemy minds. Your precognitive gift must evolve, Xana explained during one particularly grueling session. Right now you see fragments, possibilities, branches of potential futures. This is useful but limited. True mastery requires understanding why those futures exist, what choices, what actions, what invisible forces create each possibility. Cognus struggled with this concept, initially. Her visions had always been reactive. She saw what might happen and responded accordingly. But Xana was teaching her to be proactive, to not just see the future, but to understand and shape it. The breakthrough came during a meditation session deep within the facility. Cognus had been attempting to predict the outcome of a complex scenario Xana had constructed when suddenly her perspective shifted. Instead of seeing discrete possible futures, she perceived the web of causality itself. Every action creating ripples, every choice spawning new branches. The infinite complexity of cause and effect laid bare. She gasped, nearly losing her concentration. It was overwhelming. Too much information. Too many variables. Good. Xana's voice cut through the chaos. You have glimpsed what true sight means. Now learn to filter it, to focus on what matters, to distinguish signal from noise. Slowly, painfully, Cognus learned control. She developed the ability to zoom in on specific threads of possibility, to trace causality backward and forward through time, to identify the critical moments where small changes would create cascading effects. Her combat training progressed alongside her Force studies. Xana taught her lightsaber techniques, though Cognus would not construct her own weapon until later. For now she trained with practice blades, learning forms and stances, developing muscle memory that would serve her in future confrontations. You will never match me in pure physical combat, Xana said frankly. Your species lacks the raw strength and speed of humans at their peak, but you do not need to match me. You need to be effective. Your precognitive abilities give you an edge in combat that most Sith lack. Learn to exploit it. Cognus did. She developed a fighting style built around anticipation and precision. She would see her opponent's attacks before they were launched, position herself perfectly to counter or evade. Where others relied on reflexes, she relied on foresight. It made her extraordinarily difficult to hit. Months passed, then a year. Cognus transformed from a gifted assassin into something far more formidable. A Sith apprentice, skilled in both martial and mystical arts. She studied the history of the Sith, learning about the ancient empires that had fallen, the lessons that Darth had drawn from their collapse. The rule of two was not arbitrary. She came to understand it was survival strategy. The old Sith empires had collapsed because power became diluted. Too many Sith lords competing, sabotaging each other, unable to maintain focus on their true enemy. Bane had reduced them to two, one to embody power, one to crave it. each generation forced to surpass the last or die trying. It was elegant, brutal but elegant, and it had worked. For 1,000 years, the Sith had survived in secret, while the Jedi believed them extinct, growing stronger in shadow, waiting for the moment to strike. "You are beginning to understand," Zana observed one evening as they reviewed ancient texts together. "The Sith are patient. We think in terms of centuries, not years. What we build to last. The Jedi's time will come, but not yet, not for generations still." Cognus nodded, her mind already spinning forward through possibilities. She could see fragments of distant futures, shadows of conflicts yet to come, the shape of the revenge the Sith would eventually claim. But that was still far ahead. For now she had her own path to walk, her own power to develop. And one day, though the timeline remained uncertain, she would face Zana as Zana had faced Bane. That was the way of the Sith. That was the price and promise of the rule of two. Each apprentice a potential future master. Each master eventually destined to fall. Cognus accepted this completely. She would learn everything Zana could teach, would grow strong enough to challenge her master. And when that day came, one of them would die, and one would continue the legacy. This was not betrayal. This was succession. This was how the Sith ensured that each generation was stronger than the last. Through competition, through conflict, through the constant pressure of knowing that weakness meant death. She embraced it all. The pain, the power, the terrible promise of her dark destiny. She was Darth Cognus now, and her transformation had only just begun. Years flowed past like water through cupped hands. Time lost meaning in the depths of Zana's hidden facilities, measured not in days or months, but in lessons learned, powers mastered, transformations completed. Cognus grew in strength and knowledge, her understanding of the dark side deepening with each passing season. She learned Sith alchemy, the ancient art of using the Force to transform living matter, not to the extent that Zana had mastered it, but enough to understand its principles, the way life itself could be reshaped according to will, how flesh and bone were merely suggestions, malleable to those with sufficient power and knowledge. She studied Sith sorcery, the techniques that Zana had used to defeat Bane, the weaving of illusions so real they could drive victims to madness, the projection of fear and despair directly into enemy minds, the manipulation of perceptions until reality itself became uncertain. These were arts that required subtlety and patience, qualities that came naturally to one who had spent years as an assassin. But her greatest advancement came in the refinement of her precognitive abilities. Under Zana's tutelage, what had been a raw instinctive talent became something far more sophisticated. She learned to extend her sight, not just moments or hours ahead, but days, weeks, sometimes even years into potential futures. She saw the branching possibilities, not as separate timelines, but as a vast interconnected web, every choice creating ripples, every action spawning consequences that cascaded forward through time. She learned to identify the critical nodes, the moments where small interventions could create massive changes. This made her invaluable to Zana in ways beyond simple combat. Cognus became her master's strategic advisor, the one who could see patterns in galactic events that others missed. She could predict political upheavals before they occurred, identify rising threats to Sith secrecy before they became dangerous, spot opportunities for manipulation and influence. Together, master and apprentice began to shape events from shadow, not overtly, never directly. The Sith remained hidden, as Bane's doctrine demanded, but they could nudge, could whisper in the right ears, could ensure that certain people rose to power while others fell, could plant seeds that would not flower for decades, but would eventually bear fruit in ways that served Sith interests. The galaxy continued its slow dance of politics and conflict, completely unaware that two beings of immense power were subtly guiding its steps. The Republic endured, fat and complacent and corrupt. The Jedi maintained their temples and their principles, blind to the darkness growing beneath their notice. Cognus learned patience during these years. The Sith way was not one of immediate gratification. It required the ability to work across generations, to plant dominoes that would not fall until long after the planter's death. This was difficult for beings driven by passion and ambition, but it was necessary. "We are architects of the invisible," Zana explained during one of their strategy sessions. "The visible powers of the galaxy, the politicians and generals and corporate leaders, they are merely pieces on a board whose shape they cannot perceive. We move them, guide them, create the conditions for future Sith ascension." Cognus absorbed these lessons completely. She came to understand that true power was not about personal dominance. It was about influence, control, the ability to shape reality according to designs so vast that those living within them never realized they were following someone else's plans. Her combat abilities continued to develop as well. She constructed her own lightsaber. Finally, a process that required months of meditation and gathering of components. The crystal she chose was red, as befitted a Sith, but its hue was darker than most. Almost crimson black, like dried blood in shadow. The blade it produced hummed with a frequency that seemed to drink in light rather than emit it. Her fighting style matured into something unique among Sith. She did not rely on overwhelming force or acrobatic displays of skill. Instead, she fought with surgical precision, her precognitive abilities allowing her to position herself exactly where her opponent would not be. She could win fights without ever being touched, dancing through attacks that had not yet been launched, striking at vulnerabilities her enemies did not know they had exposed. Zana approved. "You understand that power without control is wasted energy," the Dark Lord observed after one particularly impressive training session. "Raw strength means nothing if it can be predicted and avoided. The strongest Jedi can be defeated by an opponent who knows where they will strike before they strike." But combat was only one aspect of Cognus's training. Zana ensured her apprentice understood politics, economics, history, xenobiology, and dozens of other subjects. A Sith Lord needed to be more than a warrior. They needed to understand the systems that governed galactic civilization so they could manipulate those systems effectively. Cognus proved an excellent student in all these areas. Her years as an assassin had taught her to observe, to learn, to adapt. Those same skills served her well as she absorbed the accumulated knowledge Zana provided. She read texts that the Jedi would have considered forbidden, studied philosophies that challenged every comfortable assumption about morality and power, learned histories that had been deliberately erased from public record. The picture that emerged was unsettling. The Republic that most citizens believed to be a force for peace and prosperity was actually built on exploitation and selective justice. The Jedi, for all their talk of serving the light, had committed atrocities in the name of their order. The comfortable narratives that governed galactic society were lies built on older lies, maintained because the truth was too uncomfortable to face. The Sith did not pretend otherwise. They embraced the reality that civilization was built on power dynamics, that the strong dominated the weak, that morality was a tool used by those in control to justify their control. They did not apologize for seeking power. They simply pursued it with single-minded dedication. This honesty appealed to Cognus. She had spent too long seeing the ugly truths beneath polite surfaces. The criminal underworld, where she had worked as the Huntress, was more honest about its nature than the Republic. At least criminals admitted they were pursuing their own interests. Politicians and Jedi wrapped their self-interest in rhetoric about service and justice. As the years accumulated, Cognus began to see glimpses of her own future, not clearly. Her own timeline remained shrouded in uncertainty, too many variables, too many choices yet unmade. But she caught fragments, visions of herself standing where Xana now stood. Not yet, not soon, but eventually. She understood what this meant. One day, she would challenge her master. One day, the rule of two would demand its price. The thought did not disturb her, as it once might have. She had come to accept it as natural. This was the Sith way. This was how strength was proven. Xana knew it too. Sometimes Cognus caught her master studying her with an expression that mixed pride and wariness. Xana was training her own eventual challenger, raising a threat to her own life. Yet she did so willingly, even eagerly, because this was how the Sith ensured their survival. Each generation must surpass the last. They never discussed it directly. Some things did not need to be spoken. Both understood the dynamic, both accepted it. For now they were master and apprentice, working in concert toward shared goals. Eventually, they would be opponents, fighting for supremacy. That transition would come when it came. Until then, they had work to do. One particular assignment tested Cognus in ways pure combat never had. Xana sent her to infiltrate a Jedi archaeological expedition that was investigating ruins on a forgotten world. The Jedi had stumbled onto evidence of ancient Sith presence. They needed to be redirected before they uncovered anything truly dangerous. Cognus went alone, disguised as a freelance scholar with expertise in ancient civilizations. Her horns marked her as Iktoshi, but that was not unusual. Her species could be found throughout the galaxy. What she hid was her connection to the Force, suppressing it so completely that even Jedi would not sense her true nature. The infiltration lasted 6 months. 6 months of working alongside Jedi, listening to their discussions, observing their methods, learning their weaknesses from within. It was enlightening in unexpected ways. The Jedi were not the monsters Sith texts sometimes portrayed them as. They were sincere in their beliefs, genuinely committed to peace and justice as they understood those concepts. They trained from childhood to suppress their emotions, to serve the greater good, to sacrifice personal desires for the sake of others. This made them admirable in some ways, but it also made them blind. They could not imagine that anyone operating from entirely different principles might be just as committed, just as disciplined. They believed the dark side corrupted inevitably, that all who embraced it became monsters. They could not conceive of Sith like Xana or Cognus, who wielded dark side power with precision and control. This blindness was their weakness. They looked for raving megalomaniacs and chaotic dark side users. They would never recognize a threat that approached them wearing a scholar's robes, speaking their language, seeming to share their values. Cognus subtly guided the expedition away from the most dangerous discoveries. She influenced their conclusions, ensuring they found nothing that would reveal the continued existence of the Sith. And when she departed, she left them believing their mission had been successful, never suspecting that one of their colleagues had been a Sith Lord in disguise. When she returned to Xana and reported on the mission, her master expressed satisfaction. "You see now why we remain hidden," Xana said. "The Jedi are powerful, numerous, and entrenched in Republic power structures. To face them openly now would be suicide. But to work from within, to manipulate them without their knowledge, this is how we will eventually prevail." Cognus agreed. She had seen the Jedi close enough to understand both their strengths and their limitations. One day, when the Sith were ready, when everything was perfectly positioned, they would strike, the Jedi would fall. The Republic would be transformed. The rule of two would culminate in galactic dominion. But not today. Not for generations still. The plan Bane had set in motion required patience beyond mortal comprehension. Each Sith Lord was a link in a chain stretching across centuries. Each contributed their part, knowing they would not live to see final victory. Cognus found peace in this understanding. She was not the end point. She was a step in the journey. Her role was to grow stronger than Xana, to train her own apprentice when the time came, to pass on the knowledge and power accumulated through generations. The ultimate victory would belong to a Sith Lord not yet born, perhaps not for centuries yet. This did not diminish her purpose. If anything, it elevated. She was part of something vast. Her existence mattered not for its own sake, but for what it contributed to the great work, the destruction of the Jedi, the transformation of the galaxy, the triumph of Sith philosophy over the weak principles that currently govern civilization. As another year turned to the next, as her power continued to grow and her mastery deepened, Cognus felt the future opening before her like a dark flower blooming. She could not see its full shape yet. Too many variables remained uncertain, but she knew its essence. She would surpass Zana, would take her place as Dark Lord of the Sith, would train her own apprentice to one day surpass her in turn, would contribute her knowledge and power to the chain of succession that led inexorably toward ultimate Sith victory. This was her destiny. This was the future she had glimpsed all those years ago when she first decided to track the Sith. This was why she had stepped out of shadow in the stone prison and accepted Zana's offer. She was Darth Cognus, Sith Lord, Master of Foresight, Architect of invisible futures, and her work had only just begun. The relationship between Darth Zana and Darth Cognus evolved over the years into something both master and apprentice understood without needing to articulate. It was not friendship. The Sith did not indulge in such sentiments, but neither was it simple dominance and submission. It was partnership bound by mutual recognition of ability, tempered by the understanding that it must eventually end in conflict. Zana sent Cognus on increasingly complex assignments as her apprentice's skills matured. These were not mere tests. They were actual operations critical to Sith interests, missions that required the unique combination of foresight and ruthlessness that Cognus embodied. One assignment took her to the corporate sector, where a coalition of trading companies was growing powerful enough to potentially challenge Republic authority. Such instability could be useful to Sith plans, but only if properly managed. Cognus spent 18 months embedded in the corporate hierarchy, rising through ranks on apparent merit while using her precognitive abilities to position herself at critical junctures. She engineered mergers and betrayals, predicted market shifts before they occurred, and ensured the right people profited from that knowledge, created rivalries that would burn for decades. When she finally withdrew, she left behind a corporate landscape fractured by competing interests, too busy fighting each other to pose any unified threat to the established order. Chaos, but controlled chaos. Exactly what the Sith needed. Another mission involved a Jedi Master who had grown curious about certain historical anomalies. He was researching the period immediately after the supposed Sith extinction, looking for patterns that did not quite fit the official narrative. His investigation was dangerously close to uncovering evidence that the Sith had survived. Cognus could have simply killed him. That would have been the direct solution. But Zana had taught her that sometimes the indirect approach was more effective. Instead, Cognus manipulated events to discredit the Jedi Master, made it appear that his research was motivated by personal obsession rather than legitimate inquiry. By the time she was finished, his own order had quietly removed him from active duty, dismissing his findings as the products of an unbalanced mind. The Jedi Master never knew he had been targeted, never suspected that his professional destruction was the work of a Sith Lord. He simply believed he had been unlucky, that politics and prejudice within the Jedi Order had derailed his important work. He spent his remaining years bitter and isolated, his warnings unheeded. It was, in its way, more cruel than simple assassination. Through these missions, Cognus learned the full scope of what it meant to be Sith. They were not merely warriors or sorcerers. They were manipulators operating on timescales that spanned generations. Every action they took was a move in a game so vast that most players did not realize they were playing. Between assignments, she trained constantly. lightsaber, combat, force techniques, mental disciplines, the study of ancient texts and forbidden knowledge. Xana pushed her relentlessly, accepting nothing less than perfection. But Cognus had learned to push herself even harder than her master demanded. She knew what was coming, could see it approaching in her visions, though the exact timing remained uncertain. One day, the training would end. One day she would face Xana, not as apprentice but as challenger. The rule of two would demand its tribute. Xana never mentioned this inevitability directly, but Cognus caught her master studying her sometimes with an expression that mixed calculation and something that might have been pride. The Dark Lord was training her own eventual opponent, raising a threat to her own existence. Yet she did so with complete commitment, holding nothing back. This was the paradox at the heart of the rule of two. The master must train the apprentice to eventually surpass them, must give them every tool, every technique, every scrap of knowledge necessary to become a threat. Because only through this process could the Sith grow stronger. Only by ensuring that each generation surpassed the last could they guarantee eventual victory. It required a discipline and foresight that most beings could never achieve. The natural instinct was to hold back, to maintain advantages, to ensure the student never quite equaled the teacher. But the Sith had learned, through bitter experience and the wisdom of Darth Bane, that this impulse led to stagnation and weakness. So Xana taught Cognus everything, held back nothing, made her as formidable as possible, and in doing so ensured that when their confrontation finally came, it would be a true test. The strongest would survive. The Sith would continue. Years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one building on the last. Cognus was no longer the assassin who had tracked Sith Lords for a mercenary's wages. She had been transformed utterly. Her understanding of the Force had deepened until she could perceive patterns invisible to others. Her combat abilities had been refined to lethal precision. Her knowledge spanned subjects from ancient philosophy to cutting-edge technology. She began to see echoes of herself in the distant future. Not clearly. The farther ahead she looked, the more uncertain the visions became. But she caught glimpses. Herself standing alone. Herself training another. The cycle continuing beyond her own life, stretching forward through generations yet unborn. This was her purpose, not to achieve final victory herself, but to ensure the chain remained unbroken. To be one link in the vast mechanism Bane had created. Her individual existence mattered less than what she contributed to the whole. Some might have found this realization depressing. To know that you were merely a tool, a means to an end that you would never witness. But Cognus found it liberating. The pressure to be the culmination of everything was gone. She simply needed to be better than what came before and prepare for what would come after. She discussed this understanding with Xana during one of their rare moments of philosophical conversation. They were reviewing intelligence from across the galaxy, tracking currents and countercurrents in galactic politics, when Cognus voiced her thoughts. We are patient because we must be, not because patience is inherently virtuous, but because our goals operate on timescales beyond individual lifetimes. What we build for successes we will never meet. Xana nodded, a ghost of satisfaction crossing her features. You understand, many apprentices struggle with this. They want glory, recognition, immediate dominion. They fail to grasp that true power requires the ability to work toward goals you will not live to see achieved. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Bane understood this. He created the rule of two knowing he would not witness its ultimate success. He accepted that his role was to be the foundation, not the culmination. Every Sith Lord since has carried that same understanding. We are steps in a staircase leading to a summit we can barely glimpse. Cognus absorbed this, her precognitive senses reaching forward through possibility. She saw the shape of that distant summit, Not its details, those remain shrouded, but its essence, a galaxy transformed. The Jedi extinct or subjugated. The Republic reshaped into an empire built on Sith principles, power concentrated and wielded without apology or restraint. It would take centuries still, perhaps longer, but it would come. The patient work of generations would eventually bear fruit, and she, Darth Cognus, would be remembered as one link in that chain, not the greatest, not the final, but necessary, essential, a Sith Lord who had played her part in the vast design. As more years passed, Cognus felt the approaching moment of transition. Her power had grown to match, and in some ways exceed her master's. Her understanding was complete. Her training was finished. The only thing remaining was the final test, the confrontation that would determine who deserved to carry the Sith legacy forward. She did not know when it would come. Her visions showed multiple possibilities, different triggers that might spark the inevitable conflict. But she knew it approached, could feel it like a storm building on the horizon. Zana felt it too. Their interactions took on new layers of tension. Not fear, exactly. The Sith did not fear death in the way others did, but anticipation, readiness. The knowledge that their partnership was entering its final phase. They trained harder, pushed each other further. Both knew that when the moment came, there could be no hesitation, no holding back. One would survive to continue the legacy. The other would die, their knowledge and power absorbed by the victor. This was the way. This was the price and promise of the rule of two, and both master and apprentice accepted it completely, with clear eyes and unwavering commitment to the Sith cause that transcended their individual existences. The galaxy turned in its ancient patterns, unaware that in hidden places, in secret facilities scattered across forgotten worlds, two beings of terrible power prepared for a confrontation that would determine the future of the Sith. One master, one apprentice, and the rule of two, patient and inexorable, awaiting its next sacrifice and its next triumph. The confrontation between Cognus and Zana came not with dramatic build-up or formal challenge, but as all truly inevitable things come, naturally, almost quietly, despite the violence it would entail. They were on Prakith, an isolated world in the deep core, inspecting a cache of ancient Sith artifacts that Zana had maintained for decades. The facility was deep underground, shielded from detection, accessible only to those who knew exactly where to look. It was the kind of place where two Sith Lords could settle their differences without interference. Zana turned to her apprentice, and Cognus saw the decision in her master's eyes before a word was spoken. The time had come. No more training, no more preparation, just the raw test of power that the rule of two demanded. "Your training is complete," Zana said, her voice carrying neither anger nor affection, simply statement of fact. "You have learned everything I can teach. You have grown strong enough to challenge me. The rule of two requires that we determine who is worthy to carry our legacy forward." Cognus felt her precognitive senses flaring, showing her branching possibilities, futures where she won, futures where she lost. The uncertainty was almost paralyzing, but she crushed that hesitation immediately. Uncertainty was acceptable. Paralysis was death. "I am ready," Cognus replied, and ignited her lightsaber. The dark crimson blade hummed to life, its frequency seeming to absorb rather than emit light. Zana's twin blades followed, purple energy crackling as master and apprentice faced each other across the chamber. They circled slowly, both gathering power, both preparing for the confrontation that would determine their fates. Then they struck, and the underground facility shook with unleashed force energy. The battle was nothing like the duel Cognus had witnessed between Bane and Zana. That had been raw power against refined sorcery, brute force against subtle manipulation. This was different. Two beings who knew each other's techniques intimately. Two minds capable of precognition and deception. Two wills equally committed to victory. Cognus saw Xana's attacks before they were launched. But her master had learned to create false intentions, to hide her true strikes behind layers of misdirection. Lightsaber combat became a deadly dance of feints and counters, neither able to land a decisive blow. The real battle happened in the Force. Xana wove her signature illusions, attacking Cognus's mind with visions of defeat and death. But Cognus had studied under this master for years. She knew the patterns of these mental assaults, could recognize and resist them. Cognus responded with her own techniques, using her precognitive abilities to destabilize Xana's confidence. She showed her master futures where the Sith failed, where the thousand-year plan collapsed, where Xana's death meant nothing because the legacy died with her. Psychological warfare waged through Force visions. The battle raged for hours. Both combatants were bleeding, exhausted, drawing on reserves of power and will that would have killed lesser beings. The chamber around them was destroyed, stone walls cracked and crumbling, ancient artifacts shattered by stray Force energy. Cognus felt herself weakening. Xana was stronger than she had anticipated. Years of experience gave the older Sith an edge that pure power could not overcome. Cognus could see the futures narrowing, the branches of possibility collapsing toward a single outcome, her death. But in that moment of apparent defeat, something shifted. Cognus's precognitive sense showed her one remaining possibility, a single thread of future where she survived. The path was narrow, requiring perfect timing and absolute commitment. There would be no second chance. She saw the opening 3 seconds before it would appear. Xana preparing a final mental assault, gathering her power for a strike that would shatter Cognus's consciousness. In those 3 seconds, the Dark Lord's physical defenses would drop fractionally, just enough. Cognus waited. Let Xana believe victory was certain. Let her gather that devastating mental attack. 2 seconds. 1 second. Now. She struck not at Xana's body, but at the foundations of the mental assault the Dark Lord was launching. Met force with force at exactly the moment when Xana's power was most committed, most unable to adapt. The mental energies collided and exploded, and in that instant of psychic chaos, Cognus drove her physical blade through her master's defenses. Xana's eyes widened, not with fear, but with understanding, perhaps even satisfaction. She had trained her apprentice well enough to defeat her. The Dark Lord fell, and Darth Cognus stood alone in the ruined chamber, bloodied and exhausted, but victorious. She felt Xana's presence in the Force fading, not completely, never completely. The knowledge, the power, the essence of what the fallen master had been, it flowed into Cognus. This was the final gift of the rule of two. The victor absorbed what the vanquished had been, each generation literally building on the last. Cognus felt her consciousness expanding. Xana's memories became available to her. Techniques she had not fully mastered now crystallized into complete understanding. Knowledge her master had possessed but never needed to articulate was suddenly hers. She understood, in that moment of transformation, what it truly meant to be Sith. It was not about individual power or personal glory. It was about being a vessel, a conduit through which accumulated power and knowledge flowed from past to future. Each Sith Lord was both themselves and all who had come before. She carried Bane's legacy now, and Xana's and her own. When she eventually fell to her own apprentice, that successor would carry all 3 legacies forward, the chain unbroken, the power growing with each succession. This was the genius of the rule of two, not just survival through secrecy, but evolution through competition. Each confrontation between master and apprentice was a crucible that burned away weakness and preserved only the strongest elements. Across generations, this process refined the Sith into something that would eventually surpass anything the Jedi could field. Cognus spent 3 days in the ruined facility, meditating on what she had become. She was no longer merely Cognus. She was Cognus plus Xana plus Bane plus all the fragments of knowledge and power that lineage carried. She was a living repository of Sith wisdom stretching back 1,000 years. But she was also still herself. Her unique perspective, her precognitive gifts, her experience as the Huntress, these elements had not been erased by absorbing her master's essence. Instead, they had been enhanced, integrated into a larger whole. She was greater than she had been, greater than Xana had been, and her own apprentice, when trained properly, would be greater still. This understanding brought clarity. She saw her place in the vast machinery Bane had created, saw how each piece fit together, how the patience of centuries was necessary, how individual desires and ambitions were subordinate to the greater purpose. The Jedi preached selflessness, but their version of it was fundamentally weak. They asked their members to deny themselves, to suppress their nature, to serve others at cost to their own being. This created resentment and hypocrisy. Jedi who claimed to serve the Force while secretly hungering for recognition and power. The Sith version of selflessness was different. It did not deny the self, it transcended the self, recognized that individual existence was temporary, but the cause was eternal. A Sith Lord could be utterly selfish in life, pursuing power without restraint, and yet still serve the greater Sith purpose through the mechanism of succession. This was the paradox that made the rule of two work. It harnessed selfishness for collective benefit, transformed individual ambition into generational progress, made betrayal and succession into evolutionary mechanisms. Cognus left Prakith with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer an apprentice, she was a master, the Dark Lord of the Sith, the sole living repository of 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge and power. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but she bore it without hesitation. Her first task was to find her own apprentice. This would take years, perhaps decades. The right candidate was not common. They needed Force sensitivity, yes, but also the right temperament, the ability to embrace darkness without being consumed by it, the intelligence to understand long-term strategy, the ruthlessness to do what was necessary without hesitation. She would search, would watch, would identify potential candidates and test them without their knowledge. When she found the right one, she would train them as Xana had trained her, completely, holding nothing back, raising her own eventual challenger. This was the way. This was the promise and price of being Sith, and Cognus accepted it as fully as she accepted her own eventual death. The cycle would continue, must continue, each generation contributing to the vast project that would culminate centuries hence in Sith dominion over the galaxy. She was one link in an eternal chain, but what a link she would be. Her precognitive abilities, refined and enhanced by absorbing Xana's knowledge, gave her advantages no previous Sith Lord had possessed. She could see patterns across decades, could position the Sith perfectly for opportunities that would not arise for generations. Under her guidance, the Sith would continue their patient work, manipulating galactic events from shadow, ensuring that when the moment finally came to reveal themselves, when the culmination of the 1,000-year plan arrived, they would be unstoppable. But that moment was still far ahead. For now, Cognus had her own path to walk, her own legacy to build, and somewhere in the galaxy, unknown even to themselves, her future apprentice waited. The next link in the chain, the next step toward eventual Sith victory. The rule of two, continued, patient, inexorable, eternal, and Darth Cognus, master of foresight, architect of invisible futures, stood at its center, ready to play her part in the vast design. The years following Cognus's ascension to Dark Lord were marked by subtle but profound changes in how the Sith operated. She brought to her role something unique, a perspective shaped by her origins as a hunter and tracker before she ever knew what the Sith truly were. Where previous Dark Lords had focused primarily on accumulation of personal power or preparation for direct conflict, Cognus understood the value of observation, of patience, not just in waiting for the right moment to strike, but in watching patterns unfold naturally before intervening. She had tracked prey across star systems by understanding their behavior, predicting their movements, knowing them better than they knew themselves. She applied these same principles to galactic manipulation. Under her guidance, the Sith shifted emphasis slightly, less direct interference, more careful positioning. Instead of pushing events in desired directions, she taught her eventual apprentice to identify where events were already flowing and how to ensure those flows served Sith interests. This required a different mindset than pure domination. It required genuine understanding of the systems being manipulated, the economic forces that drove corporate behavior, the psychological factors that influenced political decisions, the social currents that shaped public opinion. Cognus studied all of these with the same focused intensity she had once applied to tracking individual targets. Her precognitive abilities reached their full maturity during this period. What had begun as instinctive glimpses of possible futures evolved into something approaching true sight. She could perceive not just what might happen, but why, could trace causality through complex webs of interaction, could identify the critical nodes where small changes would cascade into massive effects. This made her extraordinarily effective at long-term planning. She laid groundwork for operations that would not bear fruit for decades, identified individuals who would rise to positions of power, and ensured they were subtly influenced toward perspectives compatible with eventual Sith goals, created conditions that would make the galaxy more receptive to authoritarian solutions when the time finally came for Sith revelation. But perhaps her greatest contribution was theoretical rather than practical. Cognus was the first Sith Lord to seriously study the relationship between precognition and free will. This had profound implications for Sith philosophy. The fundamental question was this: if the future could be seen, did that mean it was predetermined? And if predetermined, what meaning did choice have? What value was there in struggle if outcomes were already fixed? Cognus's answer came from lived experience. She had seen countless possible futures, had watched some materialize while others failed to manifest, had witnessed the moment of choice, that instant when possibility collapsed into actuality, and she understood that seeing the future did not eliminate choice, it illuminated it. Every decision created branches. Every action spawned consequences. The future was not a single path, but an infinite web of possibilities, constantly shifting based on choices made in the present. Precognition allowed one to see that web, to understand the likely consequences of different choices, but it did not remove the necessity of choosing. This insight had practical applications. It meant that Sith Lords with precognitive abilities could not become passive observers, assuming that what they saw would inevitably occur. They had to remain active participants, making choices that would move reality toward desired futures and away from undesired ones. But it also had deeper philosophical implications. It meant that power was not about controlling fate. It was about understanding possibility well enough to make informed choices. The Sith goal was not to eliminate uncertainty but to navigate it more effectively than anyone else could. Cognus documented these insights in texts that would be passed down through the Sith lineage. Future Dark Lords would study her work, would build on her theories, would refine her techniques. Her intellectual contribution to the Sith tradition was as significant as her practical accomplishments. She found her apprentice eventually. The details of how are lost to history, but the fact that she succeeded is evident from the continuation of the Sith line. She trained this apprentice with the same totality that Xana had shown her, held nothing back, prepared them to eventually surpass and destroy her. The identity of this apprentice remains uncertain. Records from this period are fragmentary, but someone carried the line forward after Cognus. Someone absorbed her knowledge and power through succession. Someone became the next link in the chain leading from Bane toward the eventual Sith triumph under Palpatine. What is known is that Cognus served as Dark Lord for longer than many of her predecessors. Her precognitive abilities allowed her to identify threats before they materialized, to avoid traps that might have destroyed other Sith. She was extraordinarily difficult to surprise or outmaneuver. But eventually, as the rule of two demanded, her apprentice grew strong enough to challenge her. The confrontation came, as such confrontations always did. One survived to continue the legacy. The other fell, their essence absorbed by the victor. Whether Cognus won that final battle or lost it is, in some ways, irrelevant. Either outcome served the Sith cause. If she won, she would have trained another apprentice, and the cycle would have continued. If she lost, it meant her apprentice had surpassed her, proving themselves worthy to carry the legacy forward. This was the beauty of the rule of two. It guaranteed progress, regardless of who prevailed in any individual confrontation. What matters is that the chain remained unbroken, that the knowledge she had accumulated, the techniques she had refined, the insights she had gained, all of it was preserved and passed forward through her successor, through their successor, through generation after generation, until it reached the Sith Lord who would finally execute the 1,000-year plan. Looking back from that distant future, historians would recognize Cognus as a critical link, not the greatest Sith Lord, not the final one, but essential nonetheless. She had contributed unique abilities and perspectives that shaped how later Sith approached their work. Her emphasis on observation and pattern recognition influenced strategic thinking for generations. Her journey from assassin to Sith Lord became a sort of parable within the Sith tradition. It demonstrated that the Force could call its chosen from any background. That power was not about birthright or conventional training, but about recognizing opportunity and having the courage to seize it regardless of cost. The Huntress had seen a path into darkness and had walked it without hesitation, had accepted transformation, had embraced a role in something vast and terrible, had contributed her gifts to a cause that would outlive her by centuries, and in doing so had achieved the only immortality that truly mattered. The immortality of impact, of legacy, of being a necessary part of something greater than oneself. The galaxy continued its slow turn through space, unaware that hidden within its complexity, the Sith endured, growing stronger with each generation, learning from each succession, moving with patient inevitability toward a future they had been building for a millennium. Cognus had been one architect of that future, one voice in a dark chorus spanning centuries, one master of foresight who had seen far enough ahead to understand her role and accept it completely. From hunter to huntress to Darth Cognus to Dark Lord to fallen master, each transformation a death and rebirth, each stage necessary for the next, the journey complete when her power and knowledge passed to another, continuing the eternal cycle that would eventually culminate in Sith dominion. This was her legacy, not monuments or glory, not recognition or fame, simply this. She had been one link in the chain. She had been strong enough, wise enough, ruthless enough to play her part. She had ensured the Sith survived, had contributed to their eventual triumph, had proved that the rule of two, for all its brutal demands, achieved exactly what Bane had intended. Evolution through succession, strength through sacrifice, power refined across generations, until it became unstoppable. The Huntress had tracked the greatest prey in the galaxy, the Sith themselves, and in finding them, had been transformed into something that transcended what she had been, had become part of the darkness she had sought, had merged her individual existence into the collective purpose of beings who thought in centuries and planned across millennia. Her name would be remembered by those who studied the secret history: Darth, Cognus, master of foresight; the Iktochi who had witnessed the death of Bane and the rise of Zana, who had accepted apprenticeship and transformed herself completely, who had killed her master and trained her own successor, who had contributed unique gifts to the Sith tradition and ensured its continuance; a hunter who had found purpose, an assassin who had found meaning, a being who had glimpsed fragments of the future and had chosen to walk into darkness with eyes open, accepting whatever that path demanded, becoming in the process something far greater and more terrible than she had ever been alone. This was the story of Darth Cognus, one link in an eternal chain, one life in service to a cause that spanned generations, one master of foresight who had seen the shape of destiny and had chosen to be part of it rather than resist it. The Sith endured, the legacy continued, and somewhere in the web of possible futures she had once glimpsed the culmination approached, patient, inexorable, inevitable. The stars have witnessed countless stories, billions of lives flickering into existence and fading back into darkness. Empires rising with all the grandeur mortals can muster, only to crumble into dust and memory. Philosophies competing for dominance, each claiming eternal truth, each eventually supplanted by something new. But some stories echo across generations. Some names, though spoken only in shadow, carry weight that endures beyond the speakers. Some choices made in forgotten places by beings most of the galaxy never knew existed, shape the future in ways that reverberate for centuries. The story of Darth Cognus is one such echo, from her birth on the harsh moon of Iktoch to her transformation on Dodan, from hunter to huntress to Sith Lord to Dark Lord, each stage a death and rebirth, each transformation necessary for what came after. She lived perhaps decades as Dark Lord, perhaps longer. The exact timeline is lost to the deliberate obscurity the Sith maintained. What matters is that she served her purpose, trained her apprentice, contributed her unique gifts to the accumulated knowledge of the Sith tradition. And when her time came, she faced her successor as Zana had faced her. The legacy she left was subtle but profound. Future Sith Lords would study her techniques for perceiving patterns across time, would learn from her emphasis on observation before action, would apply her insights about the relationship between precognition and choice. Her intellectual contributions shaped Sith strategic thinking for generations. The chain continued beyond her, master to apprentice, death and succession, each generation building on the last, the knowledge growing, the power refining, the plan advancing with patient inevitability toward its distant culmination. Centuries would pass. The Sith would remain hidden, unknown to the galaxy they were slowly reshaping. New Dark Lords would rise and fall, each contributing their part, each a necessary step on the long road from Bane's desperate gamble to Palpatine's ultimate triumph. And in all those centuries, through all those successions, the essence of what Cognus had been remained. A thread in the vast tapestry, a note in the dark symphony. Her precognitive gifts, passed down and built upon, would eventually help the Sith identify the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Her patience, her understanding of long timescales would become part of the Sith cultural memory. She had been one hunter among countless beings in a vast galaxy. She had become the huntress feared in certain circles but unknown to most. She had witnessed true power and had the courage to reach for it, despite knowing the price. She had transformed herself utterly, burning away everything she had been to become something greater and more terrible. And in the end, she had served, had played her part in a story so vast that even her enhanced foresight could not perceive its full scope, had contributed to a cause that transcended her individual existence, had ensured that the Sith endured. There is a kind of peace in that understanding, not the false serenity the Jedi preached, that denial of passion and emotion, but a deeper acceptance, the recognition that individual existence is temporary but impact can echo across ages. That meaning comes not from seeking personal glory, but from being part of something that continues beyond you. The galaxy turns. Stars are born in clouds of cosmic dust, burn with nuclear fire for billions of years, then fade back into darkness. Civilizations rise and fall, species evolve and go extinct. The Force flows through all of it, connecting everything in patterns too vast for most minds to comprehend. Somewhere in that infinite complexity, the story of one Iktochi assassin matters, not because she was the greatest or the final, but because she was necessary. Because without her, the chain would have broken. Because her gifts and choices contributed to something that shaped galactic history. The stone prison on Done still stands, empty now, abandoned. The blood that stained its floors has long since faded. The dark side energy that once saturated its walls has dissipated into background radiation, but the events that occurred there echo still. Bane's death, Xana's ascension, the Huntress stepping from shadow to accept her destiny. That moment, when she knelt before Xana and rose as Cognus, was one pivot point among countless others, small in itself, but necessary for everything that followed. Remove it, and the entire future changes. The Sith might have ended there, the line broken, the 1,000-year plan abandoned. But she made the choice, accepted the transformation, walked into darkness with clear eyes and unwavering commitment. And because of that choice, the Sith continued, the legacy endured, the plan advanced. There is poetry in such moments, the weight of futures unborn resting on a single decision, the invisible threads connecting one instant to cascading consequences across centuries. Cognus saw those threads more clearly than most. Her gift was to perceive the web of causality stretching forward through time, and having seen it, she chose to be part of it rather than flee from it. Sleep comes easier when we understand our place in larger patterns, when we recognize that our individual struggles are part of something vast, not meaningless, but not isolated either, connected to what came before and what will come after, links in chains we did not forge but carry forward nonetheless. The darkness between stars is not empty. It is full of potential, of possibility, of futures waiting to be born from choices not yet made. The Force flows through that darkness, connecting all things, making everything part of everything else. Cognus understood this, saw it more clearly than most, and in understanding, found her purpose, not to control the future, which is impossible even for those who can see it, but to navigate it wisely, to make choices that served causes larger than herself, to be one voice in a dark chorus that would sing across centuries. Her story ends in shadow, as all Sith stories do. The exact circumstances of her death are unknown. Whether she fell to her apprentice or died some other way is lost to deliberate obscurity. What matters is that the legacy continued, that what she had been, what she had learned, what she had contributed, all of it flowed forward through the chain of succession. From hunter to legend, from individual to eternal, from one life to one thread in a tapestry spanning 1,000 years. The transformation complete, the purpose served, the legacy secured. The stars drift in their ancient patterns, the galaxy turns, stories end and begin. Lives flicker and fade, but some echoes endure. Some names, though whispered only in darkness, carry weight across ages. Darth Cognus, the huntress who found the darkness and was transformed by it, master of foresight, architect of invisible futures, one Sith Lord among many, but necessary nonetheless, one link in the eternal chain, one life in service to something greater than life itself. Rest now in that understanding. Let the weight of ages settle gently. Let the stories of darkness fade into dreams. The galaxy will turn whether we watch or sleep. The Force will flow whether we guide it or surrender to it. And tomorrow, if we wake, there will be new stories to discover, new shadows to explore, new mysteries waiting in the darkness between stars. But for now, in this moment, there is only the peaceful end of one story, the completion of one journey, the closing of one chapter in a book that spans millennia. Sleep well. The darkness is patient. The stars will wait, and the stories, endless as they are, will be there when you return. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of Sith history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Darth Cognus's remarkable transformation, please consider subscribing for more explorations of the legends and mysteries that shaped the Star Wars galaxy. Until next time, rest easy, and may your dreams be filled with stars and ancient secrets.